So welcome to this episode of She Made It. And today we have a super special treat for you because She Made It is live. Do you believe me? We want to hear it.
There they are.
We are podcasting, we are recording with Aviatra Accelerators in their warehouse location in Covington, Kentucky, and we are so happy to be partnering with them today. And before we go any further, I want to introduce to you my lovely co-host, Clara. Clara is my creative collaborator, my newly married lover of all things aesthetic. She is on my team, and it is my treat to have her here today. So welcome, Clara.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here and so excited to see faces out in the audience and not just the walls of your office. This is really exciting. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to Aviatra, especially Nancy and Tori, who have been so gracious in planning this event and helping us bring She Made It to life.
Yeah, and I actually... The reason I wanted to partner with Aviatra is because, one, they just really honor the young, the newly entrepreneurial, creative woman that is building a business or wanting to expand their business. And I started with Aviatra years ago when they were actually called Bad Girl Ventures. And my very, very first time coaching with them, I came in as a pitch coach, a presentation coach, and I coached the class, and I met a woman by the name of Rachel Roberts. And Rachel was already an established business owner, very poised, very professional, and really just took what I gave and taught. And I remember her coming up after the class and thanking me and just connecting with her in that way. And what was super cool about that experience is that Rachel then ended up being the winner of I don't know if it was competition, but it was sort of like they presented their business, they presented their pitch, and then she was chosen to be the recipient of the award for that year. And so I was able to watch the progression of what that award did for her and see her business sort of develop and iterate. And then it led me to a fantastic trip that I took around the world. I met Rachel at an Aviatra event, and I was telling her that I was not quite in a great place in my life. And she looked at me and she said, "You should come to Bali." Yeah. And I said, "Bali?" And she said, "Well, we're leaving in a week and there's still a few spots." And
I didn't realize it was such short notice.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was really short. And she said the flights are cheap right now. And I went home and I thought about it and I said, "I'm going to Bali." And it was the first time in a long time that I traveled, especially internationally, especially that far away, and it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I got to learn more about Rachel, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about what she's doing and kind of why we ended up in Bali together.
I'm so excited about this. I do have a quick question for you, Elle. What was the one thing about Bali that you loved the most?
Yeah, well, I went to Bali on a yoga retreat with Rachel because she is a yogi, she is a speaker, she's a philosopher. She drew me in, and so of course her yoga classes were just fantastic, and she's very unusual in the way she teaches. She tells stories, and she really is a nurturing instructor as well as, like a physical instructor. But I think doing yoga in Bali was so dramatic because the vividness of the colors, the vividness of the sounds, like you think you know what green is, and then you travel to Bali and the rice fields, and there are just so many colors of green that I had never experienced. And even the sounds. I remember my very last day in Bali, I put my phone recorder on and just sat there for probably 20 minutes just to record the sounds of Bali.
I love that.
Yeah, so I would love to at this time introduce Rachel.
Yeah, absolutely. Come on, Rachel.
So let's give Rachel a big round of applause. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see you.
Yeah, you too. So I want you to just sort of give the title? When somebody says, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Several years ago, my husband and I were at a dinner party that a woman that we didn't know very well hosted, and her icebreaker for all of these people at her dinner party was to say what it is that you do in one sentence, tongue in cheek. And I said, I touch sweaty people. Yeah. So I'm a yoga teacher. I'm a small business owner. I'm a community leader. Those are the labels I like to wear.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the yoga bar is the yoga studio.
Yes.
And so I guess I just want to start with why, or maybe how did you fall in love with yoga?
Oh, goodness. So my pathway to yoga was different than most people in the West. So most people, I think, in the West find yoga through the physical practice. You know, you've seen someone who has like this lithe, beautiful, flexible body, and you're like, how'd you get that? And they're like, oh, I do yoga or Pilates or whatever. And so you start that practice. Mine was different in that as a child, I suffered from asthma. And I grew up in the Cincinnati area. I hadn't been introduced to any kind of Eastern modalities of medicine by any means. But at 19, my asthma got really bad, and a doctor told me I had to start using a daily steroid inhaler. And for some reason, that just didn't ring authentic to me. So I started seeking out a way to not have to do that every day. I'm really susceptible to medicines. Like no medicine makes me feel better. So I found a naturopathic doctor. I lived in Colorado at the time. Naturopathic doctors are like a dime a dozen in Colorado, not so much here in Kentucky where we're currently recording this, but out there they were everywhere. And the naturopathic doctor said, you need to find a yoga teacher who can introduce you to pranayama. So pranayama means the discipline of the breath. And it is an equally important limb of yoga to asana, the physical practice that we all think of when we think of yoga. So my pathway in was that, and I'm so grateful for that because we will all age, we will all suffer from dis-ease and discomfort at some point in time where our physical bodies will limit us from the flexibility that we have. But as long as you can consciously breathe, you can practice yoga. And that was my pathway into it.
I love that. And so because there's a lot of misconception about yoga, and there's a lot of different kinds of yoga, I guess, what makes yoga different than going through the motions? And yeah, so when I guess how do you promote yoga?
So when I started my business, I wrote down my mission statement. My mission statement for the yoga bars is this: share the traditional practice of yoga with as many people as possible, and to create a sustainable, fulfilling, happy life for myself. Because if I don't have that happy life for myself, I'll stop sharing yoga with as many people as possible. So for me, what a yoga practice really means is that it's a spiritual practice, a physical practice, a mental practice, and a community practice all in one. And when those all come together, then it's super sustainable, and it's something that becomes more than a daily practice. It just becomes like a way of life.
Yeah, so Claire and I were actually talking about that. Like, what is something that we, if we're not in a yoga studio, could do every day to adopt a yoga mindset? Like, you talk about breathing, but what if I can't get to the studio?
Yep. So all asana, the physical practice of yoga, and even pranayama, which I just talked about, all it's trying to do is teach you how to meditate. And one of the easiest ways to meditate is just to bring yourself into the present moment. So nowadays, most of us wear these devices, be it an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or whatever, and it'll vibrate, however you set it to tell you haven't stood for long enough, say for instance. So that's a good trigger. For me, I think a really great trigger is my phone. My phone brings up a lot of anxiety in me because I get a lot of emails, a lot of text messages. So you find that trigger, if it's your watch buzzing to say stand, if it's your phone ringing, whatever it is. And when that happens and you feel yourself feeling sort of, it's not a panic necessarily, but it's an urgency. Like, this is happening, I'm supposed to respond. Instead of responding, you use that as a key to say, okay, I'm going to pause and take 5 mindful breaths before I react. One of the things I repeat over and over and over again, and my students are probably tired of hearing me saying, is observe more and react less. So you find that thing for you. In Buddhist meditation, one of the keys is if you get road rage, then have brake lights be that thing. In Catholicism, it's church bells. Whatever that trigger is for you that reminds you, please stop. Breathe 5 conscious breaths. Come into this present moment, because right here, right now, and those of you listening know this, like close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath in. Those of you here in the room, please close your eyes. Take a deep breath in. And notice right here, right now in this moment, it's a perfect moment. Nothing is required of you right now. In this moment in time, your needs are far more than met. Those of us in this room, and hopefully most of you listening, are in phenomenal company. It's a perfect moment. Be present to it. And when you can find that day in and day out, that's yoga.
That's beautiful. I love that. And I have a question about my experience with yoga that many others may share. So I started doing yoga because it was a little cool to start doing, but I also loved physical movement as a dancer in my background. But what happened to me was I got onto the yoga mat and I cried a lot. And I think I cried for 6 months every time I sat on the yoga mat, and many in your presence. So why does that happen?
I taught a class once, and a woman who'd never been there came up to me afterwards, and she was like, hey, if this yoga stuff doesn't work out for you, you've got a real future making people cry. It happens because we don't stop and actually explore ourselves. And what could possibly be more interesting than the practice of self-study? We're all, and this word has a negative connotation because of our current moment in time, but we're all narcissists. And you're supposed to be. That's a survival skill. What could possibly be more fascinating? What field of study could you possibly ever learn more about or become more of an expert in than your own self? But we don't do that. In our own culture, we're taught to want to be someone else, or to want to be somewhere but here, or to try and climb and ascend. We don't stop and think, how am I right now? What, if anything, in this moment do I actually need? And in truth, can't I have it right here, right now, in this breath? So I think that is the big lesson, the big takeaway, the big aha moment. Bring people into the present moment and let them experience that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's and I learned, that the hips hold emotion, the shoulders hold emotion, and
so there's all this. So there's these esoteric yogi saying. So in yoga talk, the right side of your body is the masculine side, the left side is the feminine side. The front of your body is the future, the back of your body is the past. So those of you who are familiar with yoga, there's a posture called pigeon pose.
And I hate it.
Yeah. Pigeon pose is super polarizing. Whenever I lead it in a class, I know half the people love me and half the people are like, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, half the people are like, when is this bitch going to let me out of this pose?
And we're not talking about the pose. We're talking about...
Yeah, and I know that. I can feel it. I'm a sentient person. I can feel it. And the reason is because our bodies are these storehouses of our experiences. We wear our experience in the cellular level of our body. If you believe in reincarnation, then the belief is that it's many lives packed up in these cells. So when you do these poses, I like to think of them as sort of soda pop bubbles. They bubble up to the surface and they dissipate. And sometimes that manifests in you crying in a pose. Sometimes it manifests in you laughing in a pose if you're lucky.
I haven't done that yet.
Yeah. So in pigeon pose, I say this regularly in class, if you're on the left side in pigeon pose, it's a posture that's working the left side posterior of your body. So energetically, it's the female past experience of your body. So maybe it means that you don't have a great relationship with your mother. Or maybe it means that you drive a clutch. I don't know. You know. It's probably a blend of the two, and only you can actually figure it out.
That's perfect, yeah. So because She Made It, the podcast tends to focus toward how creativity comes into our lives, how would you say that creativity comes into your life?
In every breath I take. My husband is a designer, and I don't think it was until he and I got together that I got to actually say I was a designer, because I kind of grew up, I'm an interesting blend of person in that I'm a yogi, but I'm also a businesswoman, and I'm very right brain, left brain balanced. But I come from a family of pragmatists, so I thought I was supposed to be analytical and everything. But at my heart, I'm a creative. So when my husband and I first started dating, which was when I was 17 years old, he had this quote that said, "You are an artist until proven otherwise." And that rang so true with me, because I went to performing arts. I was surrounded by artists, but I didn't consider myself an artist. I thought I was sort of playing at art while being an accountant. But the truth of the matter is I am both in equal measure, which is a rarity, maybe, I don't know, maybe. But I am pretty equally balanced at those things. Where I love to be, the space I truly love to be in is creating. I am happiest when I am ideating, dreaming, creating. And I think that's part of what has kept me successful as a business owner is that it's not that I'm never satisfied, it's that I'm innately curious. And if you are innately curious, then you just want to create, you want to learn, you want to explore, you want to grow.
So with creativity, because creativity can be really abstract and messy and process, and we run into our crap, what would you say are your biggest resistances? I mean, I'll just say for me, it's my inner critic, my perfectionism. And I have to constantly be aware of that sabotaging my dreaming, my ideating. So what would you say is your biggest resistance?
It's the pragmatism. It's the fact that I have bills to pay. It's if it was just me, for me, I would lead yoga retreats around the world all the time, and I would take people to the most beautiful places in the world, and I would do those things. But I'm a real person with real family responsibilities. My husband and I are very, very blessed in that all 4 of our parents are still surviving. Both sets of parents are still married to one another and mostly like each other, so that's phenomenal. But because of that, we have householder responsibilities, and that has, by nature, has to put guardrails on your creativity. So for me, I think the biggest challenge is flourishing in my creative aspects while still holding householder responsibility.
Yeah. Well, I think of you that way. You said it yourself. You're like this yogi creative artist, but yet you have this incredible business savvy. And you've built businesses, and you're even you had the yoga bar in Over the Rhine, and now that's sort of changing. I think one of the things I've also witnessed is that you are aware of what's working, what's not working. We talked prior to the call or to the interview today, and you talked about simplify, refine. So tell me how that sort of translates into your life, or what that means to you even right now, because I know you just came off a really big experience of running for Kentucky State Senate.
My personal practice is that I'm a Buddhist. When I first started studying Buddhism, one of the first things you learn in a Buddhist practice is this idea of non-attachment. And I really bristled against the idea of non-attachment because when I first heard it, I thought, how ridiculously selfish to be non-attached to the people you love, to your parents, to your family, to your spouse, to the things you worked really hard to have, whatever it was. But as I got deeper into study and as I found the right teachers, I started realizing that what non-attachment really gives you is the present moment. So as human beings, we are gifted with the most amazing possible tool, which is the human mind. But the human mind loves to narrate. And the narration of the human mind works like this. We spend 99.9% of our time either fearing the future or recreating the past. We narrate the past in a way that shows us as either victim or villain, usually, and we narrate the future as either victim or hero. And none of these are actually reality. The reality is right here, right now. I feel like I've lost your question.
No, that's good. No, it was talking about simplifying, refining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So that practice of, thank you for bringing me back. Live, you gotta love live. So simplifying and refining for me is this idea of non-attachment. So thanks to non-attachment, I can look at a moment and say, is this working for me right now? Do I need to make an adjustment in this present moment? Is this working for me in the future? Do I need to adjust? So I mentioned to you that the mission of the yoga bar is share the practice of yoga with as many people as possible and create that sustainable, happy, fulfilling life for me. And so if I take a moment in my meditation daily and I stop and I ask those questions, am I sharing yoga with as many people as possible? Is this still sustaining and joyful for me? And if the answers to either of those is no, then I got to adjust. And I don't attach, I just closed a studio. I closed a studio, so we're here at Aviator Accelerators. The reason I went through the program is that I was about to open my studio in Over the Rhine, which was the first time I would have to go into debt for my business and I'd have to work with contractors. Fun fact, my 2 biggest fears in life, debt and contractors.
Mine is pigeon.
So I wanted to make sure I was as set up for success as that as possible. So that was about 5 years ago. So I went through this program. I won this program. I learned so much. I confronted my fears. I opened this business. It was very successful for a time. And then it started to become less successful. Now I had a choice, which was either pour myself wholeheartedly back into that and try and build it back up, or let it go and shift. And when I sat down in my meditation and I said, does holding that space mean I can share yoga with as many people as possible? And does it make a life for me that is joyful and sustainable? The answers weren't yes anymore. So it was time to shift. And yesterday I was going through things on my phone. I was doing some marketing for the studio, and I pulled up a file that was like photos of the yoga bar, and it had all these pictures of the studio I just closed. And I realized I had no sadness. I only had gratitude for the space. It's a beautiful space. My husband and I designed it together. People loved it. If there's any sadness, it's that other people miss the space. I don't miss it because I felt like I was present there every day, and it was a gift every day I got to have it.
Yeah, so I just want to reflect, because I asked about how do we bring yoga into our life, a yoga mindset, and she just shared it perfectly. Just that being present, being mindful, being in meditation, and just that self-awareness, self-focus in order to move forward, which best serves ultimately, if, like you talked about, your happiness really best serves everyone else. Yeah, that's really, really beautiful. Because I traveled to Bali with you, I heard some interesting stories about you. Uh-oh. And there's some really cool things that you've done in your past. Because, we're all kind of like, we were grown up and we have these businesses and whatever. But you did some really adventurous things when you were younger. And I think one involved an RV, one involved a trip around the world. So will you share with us a little bit about those experiences, and you can share why or how, but I know they're just very unique.
I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I like my family wasn't adventurous. My parents were, and still are, incredibly hard workers. They provided for me, as a child, we were quite poor, but I didn't ever feel poor because I had a really rich home life. I can look back at it now and see that they were struggling, but I never felt that. My parents both grew up in families that moved a lot. My dad was like a military kid. My mom's family was very sort of scattered. So they wanted to provide for their child this super stable home life. So in my whole childhood, we lived in 2 houses. So it is very frustrating to them that I'm like this filled with wanderlust person who can't be pinned down. Like I just went 4 months without a plane flight, and I was twitchy as you can imagine. Like that is crazy to me. So at any rate, I just somehow innately have always had this wanderlust, and I think it's really curiosity. So if I can leave the listeners, and I don't know how much time we have left, but I want to make sure I say this out loud. Curiosity will keep you young. It will keep you intelligent. It will keep you engaged. It will introduce you to new people. It is the actual magic of life. If you foster your own curiosity, you will travel, even if that's just to a different block in the town you live in. So I have always had this innate, insatiable curiosity. When I was in my early 30s, my previous husband, whose name is Dan, still super good friends, Dan and I were on a chairlift. We lived in Colorado at the time. We were newly married. We had just bought our first house. We were doing all of the prescribed things that as young adults you're supposed to do. We were, air quotes, fully functioning married adults. And we were on this chairlift, and Dan actually brought it up first, and he just kind of said, I don't really feel like this is the end-all, be-all that we were promised. And I was like, yeah, me either. Thank God you said it first. What do you want to do about it? And he was like, I think I want to travel. And I'm like, I love to, like, this will date your listeners, but I'm like Julie McCoy, cruise director. I love to plan travel. So I'm like, cool, I got the planning. You figure out the finances. You're better at that than I am at the time. Like, let's do this. So he and I started saving, and we saved $40,000. We bought an RV. Paid for it flat out. So we had $40,000 in this RV. We quit our jobs. We sold our house, which was a big deal because we lived in Durango, Colorado. We could not afford the house we'd bought. It was everything in the world to be able to buy a house there. It was a big deal to leave it. And we moved into this RV, and we drove all over North America for 14 months. That trip taught me more than could fill like 17 autobiographies or what have you. Like I just learned so much because we met so many different people. This was in the early 2000s. And at the time, blogs were super new. But I started a blog. I've always been like an early adopter to technology, and I started a blog so my family could watch us. Skip ahead. This blog then had like 250,000 views. And this was like, again, really early days. Like people didn't have blogs. So,
but they were a lot of work, right?
They were so much work. So, because I'm like a worker, so even though we had saved up to take a whole year off, I had to create a job for myself. So at the time, like just so I can put this in perspective, I had like a 17-pound HP laptop that I would have on my lap in the front seat while Dan was driving, Dan, my ex-husband. It had a T-Mobile, like a physical card you would plug into it with an antenna that would sometimes get internet connectivity. I took photos. I studied photojournalism, so I took photos with an actual camera. It was a digital camera, but a camera that I then had to plug in by a cord to said laptop and download. That process alone took like an hour. Then I had to edit. Photoshop wasn't really a thing, but I'd edit and downsize these photos and then upload them to Blogger. I don't even know if Blogger is still a thing. And then I would write. And I would post it. And at first, again, like I said, it was just for my family, but it caught on. And so when we first did our budget, which again was $40,000, we had a diesel RV. And diesel was cheaper than gas. This day, I swear, the day we bought that RV, it flipped for the first time in recorded history. So our budget was kind of blown. So we monetized the blog, and then the craziest thing started happening. People would write us. And they would have read the blog so they would know our preferences. And they would say, it looks like you're headed to Alabama. My wife makes the best biscuits and gravy. You can park in our driveway for free. We'll give you a PBR. And we're like, done. We're going. So because of that, we started meeting these people of walks of life that we would never have met as affluent white Coloradans. Like we wouldn't have met these people. And what we learned through that trip was that people are innately generous. They are innately kind and innately curious if you foster it. And it was amazing. That relationship ended, and at the end of that relationship, I was at a crossroads, and I was going to pick up my life fully intact, minus a husband, and move it 3 hours down the road to Denver, Colorado. And somewhere in that, I realized I had this remarkable opportunity. We had not had children. I had some financial resources at the time. I had the chance to change every single thing about my life if I wanted to. And it occurred to me that I thought I might want to change every single thing about my life. So I decided that I would go do a yoga teacher training. I had no intention to teach. I just decided I was going to do this teacher training. The blogging had served me beforehand, so I started a blog. I bought a round-the-world ticket. All of this happened, my decision to do it and leaving the country, all happened within a 6-week period. I decided I was going to do it. I bought a round-the-world ticket. I got on a plane. I left. I went first to the Tour de France. My entire trip was like this. I went sort of hot tub to cold plunge. So I started my trip at the Tour de France with a friend of mine who works for the Tour de France. So I was literally in the machine of the tour. I was dancing at the end of the tour in a fountain on the Champs-Elysees, drunk out of my mind on champagne. And 24 hours later, I'm in silence at a yoga teacher training for a month in Bali. Like, that was rough. Okay. But about halfway through...
I did 1 day of silence, and that was rough.
Yeah. But Bali resonated with me. Ellen, I didn't talk about this beforehand, but I love that you talked about the green, because one of my best girlfriends who has chosen to create life 3 times over in the most beautiful possible way. So she's 3 beautiful children, but she's 3 times registered to go to Bali and then had to cancel because she's actively creating human life. She almost went to Bali when she was in college. She's an artist, to study the color green. It was actually a class in her college because the colors of green are so vibrant there.
Yeah, it's unreal.
Yeah. So I end up in Bali. Halfway through this teacher training, going back to crying. In the year that it took me to get divorced, I promise you, I cried every day for a year. I was going through my original teacher training, and I had gone to it not intending to teach, just as like a personal study, self-study, self-improvement kind of thing. And about halfway through, everyone else in the course had like a breakdown. Like they'd cried loudly, like ugly cry, like Oprah cry.
I can relate.
In pigeon pose. And I remember my crazy type A studious mind going, I'm going to flunk out of yoga school because I haven't cried yet. And I walked out of practice one day and I realized that for me, the transformation was that I had finally stopped crying. And that was one of the biggest things. So I wrote a lot about that on the blog at the time. And that blog also served me really, really, really well. But to bring it back to where we are right now, what I think is amazing about this and about the podcasting and this moment in time that we live in is that the 2 times that I had these really elaborate blogs that served me super well, and I will just say to everyone, share whatever you're willing to share. I promise you, in my life, sharing has opened so many doors for me. It's gotten me free Pabst Blue Ribbon in Alabama. It's gotten me travel around the world. But in this moment in time, it's easier than ever before. And tell your story, because what I think makes me special as a yoga teacher is that I have no airs. I am the same person talking to this microphone as I am leading a class, as I am running for state senate. I'm just telling you who I am. But we are common enough that we all have enough shared experiences that resonates. And if you tell your story, someone's going to be like, yeah, I've had a similar experience. I've had that same emotion. I've had that same fear or self-doubt. And the validity of having someone say something you've thought out loud is so remarkably powerful.
Yeah, it's like when somebody says, you're in my head, you're in my head. Well, we're going to wrap up, and I'm just going to say, for me, it's been very challenging to share my story because I've taken that sort of behind the scenes spot, and because my background is as a professional actress, I always took on other people's lives. I always lived their emotions and their experiences. So for me, the podcast, doing episode 1, which was really, why am I doing this, was so terrifying. But it's a muscle. I think it's a muscle, and it's you'll hear we have a guest later that is going to share with us how to podcast, and she talked about with me that you got to do your first 50 to just kind of get your sea legs. So I think it's just you saying, just be generous, share. So to end today, what I'd love to ask you is, if you could speak to the younger version of you, what would you say that you would maybe do differently?
Oh, differently. I'd be gentler with myself. That's it. I mean, I was my own worst critic. I'll make this brief, but I was in India many years ago. I got super, super sick. I got parasite and so on and so forth. And I was sent to an Ayurvedic doctor who helped me with the parasite. But if you have ever studied Ayurveda, they treat the whole body. So she fixed that, or she gave me medicines for that. But then she looked at me and she said, "You're very lucky. You're always slender." I am. I'm like, you can't see me, but I'm a skinny white girl. And I will always be a skinny white girl. That's my makeup. But she said, "You're very lucky. You're always slender. Not so lucky. You'll always be soft," which is because I'm curvaceous. And it was one of the most liberating, freeing things I had ever heard, because up until that point in my life, I did 250 sit-ups every day because I lived in Colorado, and every woman that I knew in Colorado that I admired was ripped. And I thought I was supposed to look like that. But when she said that, I went, oh my gosh, you're right. I've been doing everything they've been doing. I'm just not that same body type. It's like saying you want to be 6 foot tall and working every day to stretch yourself. It's not going to happen. I'm 5'4". I haven't tried that, but now that I've said it out loud, I may. I don't know. But it was one of those moments where I was just like, the way she said it was so, I didn't know her, so there was no self-judgment in it. She was just very matter of fact about it. And it made me go, why are you so hard on yourself?
Yeah.
And I think the times I've limited myself have been my own inner critic. Limiting myself. So that would be my advice. Yeah, take it easy on yourself.
Thank you. And I would love for you real quick before, we can clap. Let's clap. But I would love for you to just share real quickly about the yoga retreats, because no matter where people live, they may not be in Cincinnati to go into your class, but no matter where they live, they could take part in the amazing retreats you host. Can you just tell us how we can find that information? Yeah,
so my studio is called The Yoga Bar. It's theyogabars.com. All the retreats are held there, or hosted there. The reason I love them is because we all live these super hectic lives. And sometimes it's really nice to just have someone else say, you're going to do this. Like I was
right.
It's very presumptuous of me. We didn't know each other super well at that moment in our lives for me to be like, you should come to Bali. I don't know.
It wasn't a sales pitch though.
No.
She knew I needed it.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm going to make this offering. Either it works or not. But I stand amazed. I leave for Bali again in 10 days. It's a sold out retreat. And the fact that people from Cincinnati, Ohio, or the greater Cincinnati area will trust me to travel a half a world away with me it still floors me to this day. But what I do is I go ahead I've never held a retreat anywhere I haven't been beforehand. I go ahead, I make sure that it has the right spiritual and philosophical vibe. I figure out the places we should visit, the activities we should participate in, the sacred spaces we should visit, the spiritual leaders we should learn from. And so that when you come on a retreat with us, our goal is to make sure that the burden of thought and decision making is taken away from you the second you arrive in our care. And that is something I love so deeply. I love doing the exploration of finding those places. And then I love to hold space for people. It's my greatest joy.
And that I didn't know from that perspective, but yes, so delivered on that promise. And my retreat had people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Not just
the
Cincinnati.
international ones generally do. This year we have people from Africa and China and Australia and Europe and a bunch of people from Midwestern Ohio. So it's always this beautiful blend. And I do love that because, in the greater Cincinnati area, at least when I was growing up, I didn't know a lot of people who traveled internationally. So the fact that I can lead these retreats in all of these places and introduce people from Cincinnati to people from the Netherlands or Africa or whatever, and then watch them, because, we have the Facebooks now. So I watch their relationships online and I see them travel and reconnect to each other in other places. And that's super fulfilling to me.
Yeah, well, it has been so fantastic having you today. And thank you, Rachel. And if you could give her a big round of applause. I'm so grateful you joined us for today's episode. I bet you're here because you know there's something more for your life. Whether you're moving into something creative or letting go in order to take that next creative step, I have something for you. My free guide to graceful transitions. You can find it at lzimmerman.com/transitions. And remember, if she made it, you can too.